Good morning. Hello and welcome to this webcast of the annual IFRS Taxonomy 2018 that we published in March of this year. My name is Anne Tarker and I'm a board member who works with the taxonomy team. Today I'm joined by members of the team, Isabella Ruta, Technical Manager, and Aisha Aquanali, Technical Associate. This webinar is part of many educational materials on the IFRS Taxonomy that are available on our website, that is, the IFRS website. Today, we'll highlight a few of those materials during our presentation. Before we start, I would just like to note that the views expressed in this presentation are those of ourselves, the presenters. They're not necessarily the views of the board or the foundation. Secondly, you can download these slides from the IFRS Taxonomy tab in our website. We're also open for questions. To ask a question, type it on the box on your screen and click Submit. You can submit questions anytime during the presentation, and we have allowed time at the end of our presentation to answer your questions. Now let's look at what we'll cover today. Firstly, we'd like to talk to you in general about the release of the IFRS Taxonomy 2018. So firstly, we'll start with some background information on the IFRS Taxonomy. We'll be explaining its scope and outlining the due process for developing the IFRS Taxonomy. We will then introduce Taxonomy 2018 and discuss the changes from the 2017 Taxonomy. We'll also tell you a bit about supporting materials that allow you to view the IFRS Taxonomy in different ways. Finally, we'll highlight some of our ongoing work towards developing the IFRS Taxonomy and supporting it in practice, and we will show you how you can contribute and stay up to date with our various activities. Now, looking first at background. What is the IFRS Taxonomy? Some of you know this, but for others, it's new. So IFRS Taxonomy is a classification system. What is classified? The presentation and disclosure requirements of IFRS Standards. What the taxonomy does is use elements to tag information in an entity's financial statements. So, for example, an entity has 1 million euros of total assets. It uses the element total assets to tag that information. Other entities do the same. Once the information is tagged, it becomes machine readable, and machines are able to quickly extract this information about total assets for all the companies in the database, and users can quickly collect information and compare it between companies. So in this way, IFRS Taxonomy contributes to the efficient communication and use of information. So I've said that the IFRS Taxonomy is based on the presentation and disclosure requirements of IFRS Standards. And that's what you can see in this slide now. IFRS Standards in red, presentation and disclosure requirements. In addition, the taxonomy captures information from illustrative examples and implementation guidance. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see reference to common reporting practice. So, in addition to presentation and disclosure requirements, illustrative examples and implementation guidance, IFRS Taxonomy also includes elements that are not explicitly required by standards, but are often reported in practice. by IFRS entities. We include these common practice elements into the IFRS taxonomy to reduce the need for entities to create entity-specific elements when they're tagging their financial statements. By providing common practice elements, we are helping preparers make more comparable information, and this is an important element of improving the usefulness and contribution that the taxonomy makes for users of financial information. Going now to our next slide, this presents an example of an IFRS taxonomy element. And this shows us the process by which information regarding disclosure in an IFRS standard is incorporated into the taxonomy. This is a disclosure requirement from IAS 1. The requirement requires an entity to present information about the profit or loss attributable to owners of the parent. Consequently, an element was created in the IFRS taxonomy with this label. To help preparers choose the correct label when they're tagging the information of the financial statements, the element also includes the following, and you can see this in the box at the bottom of the slide. It includes, firstly, we can see the label, profit brackets loss attributable to owners of the parent, but it also has a reference, and you can see there IAS 1, 81B, AII, and that's the reference back into the IFRS standard. It also has information about documentation, and this is additional information from the IFRS standard, as well as references to any other related element. In this case, the reference is to the element profit or loss. Turning now to our process for updating the IFRS taxonomy. As I've said, today we're speaking to you about the IFRS Taxonomy 2018. So, what this slide shows us is the process by which we arrive at IFRS Taxonomy 2018. Firstly, we should note that the development of IFRS Taxonomy is described in our Due Process Handbook. The annual taxonomy is a compilation of a number of updates that have been developed during the year. There are two types of updates for the IFRS taxonomy. Firstly, there are changes made to the taxonomy based on any new or amended IFRS standards. There's technical oversight of these changes, and that's by the board, and it's similar to the process for IFRS standards. Now, the second type of update comprises general improvements to the IFRS taxonomy. Now, they primarily result from external feedback and from the review of common reporting practice. The Taxonomy Review Panel, which consists of 3 to 5 board members, has oversight of these changes. In addition, we have an IFRS Taxonomy consultative group. Now, this group consists of external IFRS taxonomy experts, and they make a very valuable contribution to the development of the IFRS taxonomy. The ITCG members provide technical advice and guidance on these two types of updates that are made to the IFRS taxonomy. Meetings or calls with the ITCG are public, and recordings are made available on our website. So we can see that the due process for developing the IFRS taxonomy is similar to that for developing IFRS standards. So when required changes to the IFRS taxonomy are identified, there's an internal review process by the board or review panel. The proposed update to the IFRS taxonomy is then published for public consultation. We usually allow a comment letter period of 60 days, and this is the time when we specifically invite comments from all stakeholders. After the comment period, the feedback is summarised and presented publicly often at an ITCG consultative group meeting. Subsequently, a final update is made to IFRS Taxonomy, finalised and published on our website. Looking now at the content of IFRS Taxonomy 2018, for those of you who are not familiar, it has three elements. Firstly, there's the IFRS Taxonomy for full IFRS standards, so full IFRS standards for entities following full set of IFRS. We also have an IFRS Taxonomy for IFRS for SMEs, for entities following IFRS for SMEs. In addition, we have IFRS Taxonomy for Practice Statement 1, our management commentary guidance. The IFRS Taxonomy 2018 was released in March 2018 after the publication of the compilation of all standards. It reflects all IFRS standards applicable on 1 January 2018. Now that means it reflects all the disclosure requirements, including standards that are recently issued but not yet required. So taxonomy is ready for when those standards become required. In practice, that means it covers requirements in both the red and the blue books. In the IFRS Taxonomy 2018, the changes relate only to full IFRS standards. There were no changes in IFRS Taxonomy content in relation to IFRS for SMEs or in relation to management commentary. So I hope you found this introduction helpful. What we're going to do now is look in more depth at the changes in the IFRS Taxonomy 2018. And I'll hand over to Isa for this.
Thank you very much, Anne. So now let's look at the overview of the content changes resulting from our work from developing the 2018 IFRS Taxonomy. So if you look on the slide, we have shown you the changes being disaggregated in two types of changes. There were those resulting from the new or amended IFRS standards, and then there is one group which was just one improvement related to general improvement. Well, I would like to now tell you a little bit about new and amended IFRS standards. So in the IFRS Taxonomy 2018, we are reflecting the new standards related to insurance contracts, IFRS 17. The second change relates to amendments to IFRS 4 that was published in 2016. In particular, there are part of the changes that reflects elements that allow entities to defer IFRS 9, and there are some additional disclosures related to it. And finally, we're introducing new elements to reflect the amendment to IFRS 9 related to prepayment features with negative compensation. Now, on the next slide, we will focus on each of those changes in a little bit more details. Now, let's start with the changes related to IFRS 17 insurance contracts. Now, the slide highlights the due process steps taken before the update was included in the annual IFRS taxonomy. It has most of the steps that Anne already described on the previous slide. So the proposed changes to the IFRS taxonomy were discussed with the ITCG, that's our consultative group, and board prior publishing the proposed taxonomy update. The public consultation for this group of changes took place from May to September 2017. The usual comment period of 60 days was extended to 120 days due to the complexity and the extent of changes to the IFRS taxonomy, and that was agreed with the board. Feedback then was received from that public consultation, was presented to the board and ITCG before the changes were finalized in January 2018. Now, let's look a little bit into details of what the changes were introduced. The requirements in IFRS 17 were modeled all together and now included in a separate presentation group, so it's easier to find all of them all together. As a result of this change, almost 300 elements were created to tag information required by IFRS 17. And in addition to those elements, there were 3 axes and 16 tables created to allow the segregation that is required by IFRS 17. Secondly, we introduced new line items and 8 tables to enable reconciliation between amounts presented in the statement of financial position and statement of performance. In addition to that, there were also tables that provide information about transition amounts. The third box is now trying to highlight the new line items and tables introduced to provide information about significant judgments used in the measurement of insurance contracts. And then finally, the last set of changes introduced were new line items and 6 tables to provide information about the risks arising from insurance contracts. The information required included the sensitivity analysis and table explaining how estimates of claims changed over the period of time and how those estimates differ from the actual payments. That is often referred to as claims development table. Probably it's worth mentioning here that the standard will be effective only from the January 2021, but because the early application is permitted, those elements were already included in the IFRS taxonomy and given a reference in the reference note and information about the effective date of those elements. Now let's move to the second group of changes related to amendments to IFRS 4. The second group was included in the IFRS taxonomy, and the proposed update was actually published for public consultation together with the publication of the amendments to the IFRS Standards in September 2016. Those changes were developed as a response to concerns from some constituents regarding the different effective dates of IFRS 9 financial instruments and IFRS 17 insurance contracts. Now, this amendment had 2 parts. The first part was related to specific presentation requirements for eligible financial assets, and that was already included in the annual taxonomy 2017 because it allows early application. The second part was related to additional disclosures required for entities that defer application of IFRS 9. Because this requirement could be only applied from the effective date of IFRS 9 in 2018, it was not included in 2017 annual taxonomy, but instead it was included in 2018 taxonomy. It's worth highlighting here that using the deferral of IFRS 9, eligible entities could apply its predecessor standard IAS 39 until 20 and 21. So what we have done is to help preparers to distinguish those elements, we've added an expiry date for elements that were amended to reflect disclosure and presentation requirements related to IAS 39, and that was mostly related to IFRS 7. That includes disclosure and presentation requirements for IAS 39. Now let's move to the third group, and that is related to amendments to IFRS 9 prepayment features with negative compensation. That was published again together with the amendment to those standards published in October 2017. As a result of that publication, the IFRS taxonomy was updated to include 2 tables to reflect 1 new disclosure requirement for this amendment. As with other changes, the board and ITCG discussed the change before the September 2017, and then in February 2018 to discuss the feedback that we have received on the public consultation. And then after all that, we included those changes in the annual taxonomy in March 2018. Again, as with other changes, those changes from that amendment are effective only from January 2019. And to help preparers to distinguish those changes, we included such a note in the reference section of each element that we created for this change. Now, The final group of changes that is not related to the changes from amendment or new IFRS standards were included to general improvements. And those changes were mainly resulted from the feedback that we have received from constituents. Those changes were reviewed by the IFRS Taxonomy Review Panel to ensure that they are consistent with the IFRS standards. Changes were published for public consultation in November 2017 for 60 days. The changes were also discussed with the ITCG, our consultative group, in June and October 2017. And the feedback received for public consultation was reported at the February meeting of the ITCG. And finally, as with all other changes, we compiled all the changes together, including the general improvements in the annual taxonomy in the annual taxonomy 2018. Now let's look a little bit in more details of what those general improvements included. The main improvement area in the IFRS taxonomy that is resulted from the general improvements that we think that will affect quite a few companies relates to continuing and discontinuing operation axis. In particular, what we have done is changing the default member on that axis from aggregated continuing and discontinuing operation to continuing operation. And the reason that we've done is to align the IFRS taxonomy with the common understanding for most of the elements that, for example, for line items like revenue, it is mostly understood to reflect continuing operations only. So we hope to avoid ambiguity and confusion for people to report the most common profit or loss statement. The other change was mainly introduced to minimize the number of extensions in the IFRS taxonomy. So currently the IFRS taxonomy includes 4 line items to reflect the disaggregation of the single amount of the discontinued operations presented in profit or loss as required by IFRS 5. Those 4 line items are created to tag discontinued operations only. So for example, we used to have a line item that was revenue for discontinued operations. However, we noted that entities might present more line items, and then to allow to tag those elements, the entity will need to create extensions. So for example, to tag cost of goods sold that wasn't a specific line item, an entity will need to create extensions. So in the IFRS Taxonomy 2018, the disclosure was modeled as a table with a specific axis for discontinued operations. We removed all those 4 line items that we had previously, and now an entity could use any element from the IFRS Taxonomy with a discontinued operation member to reflect the segregation of the single amounts presented in profit or loss. The second general improvement area including changes to a number of axes that will apply to all the tables reflecting the disclosure requirements in IAS 19. In particular, we incorporated 2 existing axes in the IFRS taxonomy to those tables and added 3 new axes as well. Those changes are intended to better reflect the segregation disclosures related to defined benefit plans. The third general improvement area included changes to better reflect the disclosure requirements for financial assets and financial liabilities in IFRS 7 related to financial instruments presentation and disclosures, and to align those modelings of those disclosures with similar requirements in IFRS 17 insurance contracts. We believe that the consistency within the IFRS taxonomy is helping people to understand how to tag the financial statement and presentation and disclosure requirements that are similar in different standards. Now, this slide will show you a little bit of statistics, so you actually see how many different elements we have included in the IFRS taxonomy. And as you can see, over 60% of our elements come from the presentation and disclosure requirements in the IFRS standards. There is around 13% of elements that are not required but we still included them in the IFRS taxonomy because they are included as examples in the IFRS Standards, as discussed before. It's in the implementation guidance or illustrative examples, or even in the IFRS Standard itself, but not as a requirement. Now, over 20% of the elements are not specifically mentioned in the IFRS Standards, but are added to the IFRS Taxonomy as a result of the Common Reporting Practice analysis. In the 2018 IFRS Taxonomy, as you can see in the slide, the most substantive changes were adding elements related to presentation and disclosure requirements in the IFRS Standards. And as we discussed before, mostly they are coming from IFRS 17 insurance contracts, but also some of them were related to those additional disclosures from amendments to IFRS 4. Finally, I think it's worth pointing out some editorial changes that are related to IFRS standards becoming effective in 2018. In most circumstances, when the old IFRS standard is not applicable anymore, the related elements could be removed from the full IFRS taxonomy. So in the current year, as we discussed before, IFRS 9 financial instruments became effective. However, due to amendment to IFRS 4 that extended the application date of IFRS 9 until 1st January 2021 for some companies, elements related to previous standard IAS 39 financial instruments remained in the IFRS Taxonomy 2018. So consequently, the staff has changed the expiry date from 1st January 2018 to 1st January 2021 for many elements that were related to that standard and are actually from IFRS 7 that is related to presentation disclosure requirements for IAS 39. In addition, there were small changes related to IFRS 15 related to revenue from customer contracts that became effective in 2018. A small number of elements were deprecated from IAS 11 construction contracts and from IAS 18 revenue that are not applicable anymore. Now, what we would like to show you is where the annual IFRS taxonomy is located on our website. So it is on a separate tab. We have included all the annual taxonomies all together. And you can see there is IFRS Taxonomy 2018. On the slide, we can also see annual taxonomy 2017, but there is a few more there as well. We just didn't include them on the slide. Now, what I would like to talk about is a little bit about support that we are providing in viewing the IFRS taxonomy in different formats to accommodate different needs of the users of the IFRS taxonomy. So on the slide 21, there is like a summary that is showing that IFRS taxonomy can be viewed in a number of different ways. And most of those resources are published as a supporting materials for the annual IFRS taxonomy, but also any proposed IFRS taxonomy updates that are released throughout the year. And on the next slide, I will go through each one of them and I will show you an example of how they look like. So the first resource that I would like to show you is the IFRS Taxonomy Illustrated, or the way that we refer to it quite often, ITI. The IFRS Taxonomy Illustrated provides a view of the IFRS taxonomy without requiring specialized software. And there are two formats available for the ITIs. Those include the HTML version, which is available on the eIFRS website, and that's a slide that you can see right now. There is also a PDF version, which is available on the IFRS Taxonomy website. So both formats are available for full IFRS standards, but also IFRS for SMEs. And both standards include mostly similar information, including interactive links to the IFRS standards. However, the HTML version that you can see now on the slide allows viewers to view the documentation labels, which provide additional explanation for the elements and The documentation labels on the slides are on the right-hand side. And those are sourced from the IFRS standards, except from the common practice, which are usually broadly defined. Now, on the next slide, you will see the versioning information. And versioning information is quite helpful for understanding the changes between two IFRS taxonomy versions. The editorial changes are provided in a similar way as track changes in the Word document. That is, when the element is added, it is underlined, and when it is removed, it's tracked through. Also, what we're trying to do to highlight the changes, we are using different colors to highlight the elements that are added and removed. More specifically, we would like to highlight that there are two versioning reports for the IFRS Taxonomy 2018 on our website. The first is a comparison with the annual IFRS Taxonomy 2017. There is also a second comparison with the final taxonomy update for IFRS 17 that was published in January. So for people that are following more closely of all the developments to the IFRS taxonomy, you can either compare it to the 2017 taxonomy or just to the recently released IFRS 17 taxonomy. Now, the third resource that we would like to show you today is IFRS. IFRS is available on the IFRS website for professional subscribers, and it is an online tool that allows subscribers to view IFRS taxonomy elements embedded in the IFRS standards. So the example that we are showing you today illustrates extract from the IS1, and the IFRS allows users to see the full set of elements available in the IFRS taxonomy to reflect the disclosure requirements for the particular paragraph or section, as you can see on the slide. We believe that this resource is especially useful for preparers of financial statements who would like to find elements based on the requirements used for disclosing information in the financial statements. The next source of useful information, we believe, on our IFRS website is the tagging examples using the IFRS taxonomy. So the IFRS Foundation is trying to demonstrate the use of elements in the IFRS taxonomy by tagging illustrative examples that accompany IFRS standards. The examples are provided in two formats. One is XBRL format, which requires specialized software for opening documents, but also we provide this document in inline XBRL, which allows users to view example in most internet browsers. And the example on the website is of the inline XBRL. In addition, the inline XBRL viewer allows users to view the details associated with the elements by clicking on the highlighted number. And again, that's what we were trying to show on this slide. So we are showing the insurance revenue, and then the box on the right-hand side is showing the information that you will see when you click on the highlighted number 140. The IFRS Foundation also demonstrates the use of the IFRS taxonomy by tagging its own financial statements. Our tagged financial statements are available in both XBRL and inline XBRL formats. And again, on the slide, we were trying to show you what information you will see when you click on the highlighted number, and that is related to trade and other current receivables. A number of other resources, including educational materials, are available on the IFRS Taxonomy website page to assist in understanding the IFRS Taxonomy. This, for example, includes the recently published Preparer's Guide, but also the Regulator's Guide to using the IFRS Taxonomy. So we have published the Preparer's Guide in December 2017. And we hope that it answers frequently asked questions, such as, for example, how to find and select the correct element and reporting specific values. It also addresses some possible misunderstandings about the use of the IFRS taxonomy, and we hope that especially preparers will find this guide useful when they applying the IFRS taxonomy to navigate and understand how the IFRS taxonomy is intended to be used. Now I will hand over to Anne to talk about a little bit about what we are working on right now.
Thank you, Isa. So on slide 29, we can see mention of amendments to IFRS Standards and their date of issue for 2018. So conceptual framework in March, definition of material, amendments to IAS 1 and IAS 8, expected Q4 of this year, and definition of a business, amendments to IFRS 3, expected Q4 of this year. However, we expect no significant changes to the IFRS taxonomy to be resulting from these standard-setting activities in 2018. This is because most of the expected final documents on the board's current work plan are thought to have little or no impact on the taxonomy. Consequently, most of our efforts in 2018 will be devoted to further analysing common reporting practice and also supporting implementation of IFRS taxonomy. Our focus in 2018 has been on the common practice analysis relating to IFRS 13, the fair value measurement standard that relates to disclosures about fair value measurement. So the staff is currently working on an analysis of common practice for the disclosure requirements of IFRS 13. The panel has discussed proposals with the consultative group and the IFRS Taxonomy Review Panel this year in both April and June. So where we're up to at the moment is to prepare and review the materials relating to these common practice elements for IFRS 13. And we expect the publication of a proposed taxonomy update in September. Now, around that time, the documents that will be published for public comment include the following. Well, firstly, we'll have a webcast to provide a high-level overview of the materials. We will provide a proposed taxonomy update that explains to you the proposed changes and poses questions for constituents. We will show the proposed IFRS taxonomy files so that users can see the changes in the IFRS taxonomy. And we'll also provide the versioning information in a PDF format to illustrate the changes proposed. And the IFRS taxonomy illustrated will be in PDF and HTML version. We're continuing this work evaluating entities' disclosures to identify where we could have further common practice projects. So as part of this, we really encourage stakeholders to be in touch with us and let us know areas where you think that the common practice project should focus. Also in 2018, in terms of implementation support, we've been busy in a couple of areas. We're making improvements to guides. Isa mentioned the guides for preparers and regulators. So we're working on improvements to those. They were discussed at the April ITCG meeting. Another important area of work is the implementation notes to the IFRS taxonomy. This is a new initiative, and we've embarked on this with the aim of decreasing the common errors in the filings regarding the signs for values. We expect to be able to produce these materials in 2018.
Before we move on, I would like to just highlight that there is a question bar at the top, at the bottom of your page. So if you have any questions as we go through the slides, please let us know, and we will try to have a little bit of time at the end of the presentation to answer those questions.
So looking at how you can stay in touch with us and how you can keep up to date, is a snapshot from our IFRS website, and you can see there, go to Issue Standards, go to IFRS Taxonomy, and go to News, and you can see details of the developments. If you elect to follow us, you will receive emails about IFRS Taxonomy. You can also, in addition to news, you'll find updates on LinkedIn and Twitter. You're able to observe the discussions of the IFRS Taxonomy Consultative Group by going to the Meetings tab. The meetings are public. You can observe by coming to our office in London, or you can follow via our website. The last meeting was April, and we'll continue to provide updates about the next meeting. In terms of consultative documents, we are interested in your feedback. Our last consultative document shown here in this slide was the IFRS Taxonomy update relating to IFRS 17, insurance contracts. So this is the area of our website where you can find the information about the updates, and we look forward to receiving feedback from you on the proposed updates. Comment period is usually 60 days. We have no documents open at the moment, but as we've discussed, IFRS 13 is being worked on at the moment in terms of the common reporting practice disclosures, and we would really value your feedback on this one. So, in conclusion, I would encourage you to help us shape the IFRS taxonomy. It's an incredibly important initiative to IFRS, and we would really value any comments that you can provide to us. We aren't always able to respond to individual comments, but your feedback is noted, and this does give you the opportunity of influencing the developments that are going on here. So, with that brings us to the end of our presentation, and we're going to address some of the questions that we have received.
Yes, thank you, Anne. So we have one question, and that question is really about where can I learn more about the IFRS taxonomy and how would I choose the correct element? So on one of the slides that we already presented you today was the Preparer's Guide. And really we developed the Preparer's Guide that was published last year to help preparers to understand how the IFRS taxonomy is intended to be used and how to choose the correct element. And there is a few places or few sections of the IFRS taxonomy that is supposed to help you with the choosing correct element. That's, for example, the reference to the IFRS standard that Anne was talking to us about. There is also a documentation label that again provides additional information to choose the appropriate element. Also, we have discussed a little bit about additional information or additional materials that you can access on the IFRS website. So those are, for example, illustrative examples that are being tagged by using the IFRS taxonomy, or, for example, the ex-IFRS, that again, different ways that you can use to choose the correct element. But again, I would like most of you to direct to Preparer's Guide, because that is a comprehensive overview of how the IFRS taxonomy should be used. We have also included the common misconceptions that we did find out through talking to preparers or attending many conferences or any other meetings. And we know that some people have views about the IFRS taxonomy that are not necessarily true. So we're trying to clarify that as well. The other question that we are having is, what can I do if I have any questions about the IFRS taxonomy? Again, what I would like to highlight is, or encourage you to do, is read the Preparer's Guide. We did find out that most of the questions can be answered through reading the Preparer's Guide. If you still have questions, we've got the Contact Us box that Anne was discussing just a few minutes ago. Please talk to us and let us know if you have any questions, if you have any ideas when you're already using the IFRS taxonomy. That will be very helpful for us. We have also received one question on the example of illustration of the changes that we proposed to the IFRS Taxonomy 2018. And what we have developed is the set of, I think, 3 disclosures that we have tagged from the illustrative examples to IFRS 17. And we demonstrated how we see the use of the elements that were developed for the IFRS 17 disclosures, and they are available on the website. And again, we hope you will find them useful. We will have another session later on today, so if you have any more questions, please let us know and attend the other session. All those webinars and the slides will be available after the presentation for you to listen if you cannot do it live. So we would like to thank you for attending, and we hope that you found it useful.
Thank you, and good morning.